Welcome back to the Durandus Institute's Quarantide video series. This second short is inspired by a question from a fellow parishioner. What is the history of the Magnificat, and can you demonstrate some of its musical forms? The Magnificat, or just the Mag, is the canticle of the Blessed Virgin Mary as recorded in the Gospel of Luke's infancy narrative. It's the response after the Virgin Mary has received the good news from the angel Gabriel that she is to give birth to the Messiah. Its name, Magnificat, comes from the first word in the Latin translation, the most commonly sung form of the canticle, Magnificat anima mea Dominum. My soul doth magnify the Lord. Now, before we delve more deeply into the history of the text, let's just recite it together once because it's fairly short. My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Saviour. For he hath regarded the lowliness of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. For he that is mighty hath magnified me, and holy is his name. And his mercy is on them that fear him throughout all generations. He hath showed strength with his arm. He hath scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seat, and hath exalted the humble and meek. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away. He, remembering his mercy, hath opened his servant Israel, as he promised to our forefathers Abraham and his seed forever. The Magnificat is a powerful prayer which is both traditional and radical. It's traditional insofar as that it fits the Jewish tradition of canticles from the Old Testament. The Magnificat is often compared to the Song of Hannah, which Hannah sung to give thanks to God after the birth of Samuel. It's also traditional insofar as that the Magnificat is a hymn of thanks to God, referring back to promises made in the Old Testament, the promise given to Abraham. But the Magnificat is also radical in the sense that it indicates that God will subvert the current order. And I think that an innocent bystander, overhearing the Virgin Mary singing this canticle for the first time, might have thought that she was referring to the overthrow of the Roman Empire. However, what's even more revolutionary about the text is that, of course, it doesn't refer just to the political circumstances of the first century in Judea, but rather it speaks to God's plan for all time, because it shows that 2,000 years later we're still singing the Magnificat long after the Roman Empire has crumbled, but we sing it to this day because it speaks of God's plan that he is with the poor and the humble always, in every nation, throughout all generations until the end of time. It's easy to see then the appeal of this canticle and why it's been sung so often through the church. It was adopted very early on by monastic communities from the foundation of monasticism in the early church. In the East, the Magnificat is sung at Orthros, or the morning office, whereas in the West, the Magnificat is sung at Vespers, the evening office. Why is it sung at Vespers? Well, William Durandus, the medieval French bishop, for whom the Durandus Institute is named, had this to say, that it was assigned to Vespers because, quote, the world was saved in its eventide by the ascent of Mary to the divine plan of redemption. In these monastic environments, of course, The Magnificat was sung to plain song, which in the West we call Gregorian chant. Very simple melodies for monks who would sing the entire office throughout the day. These tones were adjusted based on the antiphons that came before and after the Magnificat, just as there were antiphons before and after the Psalms. Some of these tones are still in the Liber Usualis, which I referred back to in my first video, and I can demonstrate a couple of those tones for you now. For example, the tone for Magnificat, the first tone, Magnificat anima mea Dominum. And the second verse maintains that, and each succeeding verse maintains that same intonation at the beginning. Et exultavit spiritus meus in Deo salutare meo. Or the second tone, Magnificat anima mea Dominum, et exultavit spiritus meus in Deo salutare meo. During the flourishing of medieval Christendom, the ceremonies around the singing of the Magnificat grew further. So, first there was the practice of the priest incensing the high altar as the Magnificat was sung, and then through the centuries, the ceremony grew to include also the side altars, at least on the major feast days, or even assigning two priests to divide the church to incense the various side altars. This was true especially in the medieval English church, which used the medieval use of Sarum, that is, the liturgical practices of Salisbury Cathedral, which were admired and imitated by other churches throughout the Kingdom of England and even Ireland. For our celebration of Vespers and the use of Sarum on Candlemas Eve with the Durandus Institute here in Philadelphia, we had two priests incense the side altars, and to accompany that motion, we used a prolonged setting of the Magnificat, the one written by Robert White during the brief restoration of the Sarum use under the reign of Queen Mary. That setting, if we had done the full version, would have taken over 12 minutes to sing. Unfortunately, we did not have enough time to rehearse it, but it is one of the most splendid compositions of the Magnificat, in my opinion, of all time. Now, at the English Reformation, the incensing of the altars fell out of practice, but the singing of the Magnificat remained. So when Archbishop Cranmer reformed the divine office in the Book of Common Prayer, he took elements of Vespers, evening prayer, and Compline, night prayer, to conjoin them into a single office of evening prayer, which retained the nickname Evensong, which had actually applied even to Vespers and the Sarum office before then. But in the Anglican form of Evensong, the Magnificat was one canticle together with the canticle from Compline, the canticle of Simeon, Nunc Dimittis, and now they were to be used as a pair, and so composers writing in the Church of England, they usually would make their compositions as part of a unit, so what they would call the Mag and Nunc together. And because there was no more incensing of the altars, then the length of time to sing these compositions was drastically reduced. So, for example, William Byrd, who was writing Anglican settings under the reign of Queen Elizabeth, his Magnificat for the second service would only take about 4 minutes to sing versus Robert White's 12-minute Magnificat, for example, under the Sarum office. Meanwhile, on the European continent, the compositions of the Magnificat continue to pace. Palestrina, for example, wrote 2 Magnificats, two for each of the 8 tones, for a total of 16. One of those, which might be heard when if the shutdown abates by the end of May, the Durandus Institute was planning to have a pontifical Vespers celebrated by Bishop Schlert, the ordinary of the Diocese of Allentown, for the Eve of Pentecost. So, God willing, the shutdown will end by then, so that we'll have our pontifical Vespers, and you might be able to hear the singing of one of Palestrina's Magnificats at that time. Thanks again for joining me here for one of my short video clips. Please subscribe to the Durandus Institute's YouTube channel if you haven't already done so, and like our Facebook page. I'll end this video clip by inserting a short excerpt from the Sarum Vespers at the singing of the Magnificat by Robert White during the incensation of the altars. Thanks again.
Misericordia eius a